A lot of people think that the English don't make peated whiskey, or that you can only get lightly peated English whiskey or peated cask finishes. Not so. English Whisky Company in Norfolk have been producing heavily peated English whisky of many types for nearly 20 years. This is the English Whisky Company Smokey. So this is the peated counterpart to the English Whisky Company original that I reviewed last time. So this one it's their other entry-level standard whisky. It's kind of the introduction to the English Whisky Company range. It's also bottled at 43%. It's also natural colour and non-chill filtered, although they don't bother to say so on the label. It's also matured in bourbon casks and also sells for the same as this one, £47.50 a bottle. The key and really only difference is that this is made with peated malt sourced from Islay rather than the unpeated Norfolk malt. So let's get some in the glass and see if the English really can make peated whiskey. Imagine that. Peat is actually a very Norfolk thing. Norfolk, like a lot of the west coast of Scotland, is very low-lying, has lots of wetlands and peat beds, or we used to have peat beds. The Norfolk Broads in particular, you may or may not know this, but the Norfolk Broads used to be peatworks. They were enormous peat beds which were excavated hundreds of years ago by monks, I think it was, if I remember my middle school education properly. But they excavated all of the peat, and the massive holes in the ground left over filled up with water and became the navigable waterways that are now the Norfolk Broads. So, kind of makes sense that Norfolk should make a peated whisky. Although saying that, I am told that the peat for this English Whisky Smokey actually comes from Islay. That's what I was told by the tour guide. Probably true. Does it smell like Islay? I think it kind of does. It smells like Norfolk whiskey. It has that unmistakable house style of very fruity, barley-driven whiskey that you get from the English Whisky Company. But I don't know. Is peat peat? Obviously the peat that you get from the Highlands is very different to an Islay peat. But yeah, I would say that probably does smell like a bright and fruity Islay peated dram. Very sweet and smoky. A little bit of a barbecue note. Very like a sharp, sweet fruitiness, like throwing a whole lime on a barbecue. As well as a little bit of a smoky, spicy wood smoke note like mesquite barbecue. But very sweet, very fruity. A little bit of a sour lime and grapefruit note. Slight nuttiness, and I would say lightly farmy as a quality for the peat. It's not a million miles away from what you would imagine from like a heavily diluted refill Lefroy. Like if you made 43% Williamson, like an independently bottled Lefroy, which wasn't matured in first fill casks like they actually do with like the Lefroy 10-year-old and the 10-year-old cask strength. If you had a refill matured Williamson, then it wouldn't be a million miles away from this. Or possibly even a Bowmore without a sherry. Who remembers Bowmore White Sands? It's like I think it was a 17-year-old bourbon matured Bowmore. And I loved that stuff. I'm so sad that they stopped making it. And I don't really understand why they did. I can only assume that because it didn't have the trademark Bowmore sherry, they just felt like it wasn't what their customers wanted, but I thought that was a really good dram. But yeah, my point was, that if you had a 43% bourbon matured Bowmore, it would probably have some strong similarities with this. A little bit of a spicy cough sweet note on the nose of this one as well, which again similar to a Bowmore peat. Let's see how it tastes. Again, beautiful natural colour, fairly pale. I would say not quite as hazy as the unpeated from the English Whisky Company, as I said before. But beautiful natural colour, natural presented whisky, even though it is an entry-level product. Which just leads me to believe that all of these Scottish distilleries that say that you have to chill filter a low-strength whisky, they're just talking crap. On the palate of this one though, a beautiful sour ashiness, quite a bit of maltiness as well, sweet and malty and lightly smoky. I don't think that this is a massive peat bomb, but the peat is always there. I would say that it's kind of a stale, lingering peat, kind of like the smokiness that gets into your clothes after a barbecue the previous night. Lots of nuttiness coming through from the malt as well. Slightly medicinal, but I'd say that the medicinal quality of the peat on this is more of a background note, like a medicinal germaline, medicinal salve note. But really very malty, slightly smoky, and quite mature. And I don't know if it's just the fact that the peat obviously has the ability to cover up youth in a whisky, so it may be that the peat is helping this one disguise the fact that it's not very old compared to this one. But I'm not getting as much youth on this one. Surprising lack of youth. And I think on the late palate there's a really nice rich honeyed mead type note, with my only criticism really being that because it is a 43% whisky and it is a peated whisky, towards the end of the palate it does drift off and fade away. It does come across as a little bit underpowered, and I might just be speaking for myself here, but when I have a peated dram, I want it to be a forceful, powerful experience, and when you have a peated whisky at 43%, you just don't get that. But all in all, an excellent entry-level peated dram. Gonna have one more sip and look at the finish. Smoky, lingering wood smoke, malty, very malty, slightly medicinal and coastal, a little bit of salinity in there, but really the finish really descends into that watery peatiness. All in all though, and I'm saying this from a perspective of experience because I've had a few bottles of this over the years. I think I had a bottle when it was first released, and I think this is miles better than it used to be. Much better. Serious improvement. I remember trying this when it first came out, and it was just quite harsh and fainty. It really had too many bugs to iron out. It was too much of an unfinished product, and this isn't like that at all. It's much improved. This is much more balanced, but still it is an entry-level 43% product, and that means that it is that little bit mild. And I would say that this is slightly hard to recommend purely because there are better options for peated whisky from the English Whisky Company. And in my opinion, and I'm just talking to you malt heads out there, you enthusiasts who are passionate and discerning and demanding of your whisky, if you're looking for a peated whisky from the English Whisky Company, you really need to go a step up from this. I think that this one is a fine example. It's a great, fun, fruity, pleasant little introduction to the English Whisky Company for an unpeated dram. But I think with this one, if you want a ballsy, forceful, powerful, peated whisky from this distillery, you really need to go a step up to the small batch releases. Because in my opinion, a peated whisky should be a powerful experience. And I really think that that warrants 46% or more. As it is though, as an entry-level whisky, I think that it's a very good entry-level offering. And I think that it's an important part of the English whisky scene because there really aren't that many good peated English whiskies, especially if you don't count the peated cask finishes. And for that, I'm eternally grateful for the English Whisky Company because they are absolutely knocking it out of the park with all of their peated whisky. This is a great example, and all of the other ones like the 2010 vintage and the Smokey Oak and the peated and sherried ones, all of the heavily peated stuff from the English Whisky Company is absolutely phenomenal, and it beats the pants off a lot of peated Scotch. But with this one in particular, I think that if you discerning malt enthusiasts out there are looking for a quality English peated whisky, this is good, but you really should go for the small batch stuff or the cask strength. If you're already a fan of those peated English Whisky Company small batch releases and the single cask stuff, then this might be of interest to you as a peated casual dram. But I think that with the relatively high price of this one, it could really do with being like £5 cheaper, I think. I think that charging £47.50 for this when it's 43% is a little bit much. And I think that that slightly high price point makes this a little bit of a questionable recommendation. On the other hand, if this is the only one that you've had and you're looking for other people's thoughts on it, then I would really recommend trying some of the small batch stuff or the single cask stuff. They're all peatier than this, and they're all better than this. I do think that this one would be highly recommendable if it's just a little bit cheaper. I think that the light body and the watery peat and the nuttiness, it actually reminds me a little bit of something like McLean's Nose. The problem is that this costs more than McLean's Nose, and while it is, in my opinion, significantly better, I don't think that this is great value compared to the rest of the peated English Whisky Company range. I think that this one is a good introduction and a casual sipper. It's very pleasant as a casual dram. I just think that it's priced a little bit high for that. So what other things do I think that this is comparable to and similar to? I think that it compares surprisingly well to something like Kilchoman and Lochgrunat. They're both well-made, malty, heavily peated whiskies that for completely different reasons are that little bit underpowered. They're both young and straightforward but decent peated malts. I'd say that, and I did do an A-B comparison, I'd say that this one is a little bit fruitier and maltier but a little bit less peaty than the Kilchoman and Lochgrunat, probably down to slightly more active casks being used for this one, but really very similar, same ballpark to the Lochgrunat. And if you liked Lochgrunat, which I think is still available, then you'll probably like this one. I think this is probably also quite similar to a lot of Kalilas because of that fairly heavy peat and the very bright fruity maltiness. So who would I recommend this to? I probably wouldn't necessarily. While the original is a lovely bright and malty whiskey, I just prefer more power in my peated whiskey than a 43% malt offers. And for that reason, I think unless you are absolutely determined to spend less than £50 on a peated English whiskey, which is fair enough, that's going to describe some people, but apart from that, I would recommend going for a small batch release or one of the single cask offerings. I think that this is a good, and good is the operative term there, is a good introduction to peated English whiskey and a good whiskey in general, but there is better peated whiskey to be had from the English Whisky Company. So thanks for joining me for this one. It's been good to review some accessible, affordable entry-level whiskies, and also good to look at some whiskies from my local distillery. And I really think that apart from the price perhaps being a little bit high, but really in this day and age of £175 Port Charlotte 18s, it's not that bad. Let me know what you think of either of these two if you've had them, and English Whisky and the Norfolk English Whisky Company in particular. Thanks for watching, and by all means pick one of these up if you see it for a good price. If you see these on offer, they are great casual drams. They're both very well made with very few flaws at all, and really my commentary is just based on what I imagine you guys as discernible, demanding malt enthusiasts would be looking for a whisky based on my own experience. But really, I'm halfway down the bottle with both of these. They go down very easily. Very pleasant little drams. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.